This is John. Today I'm on the beat. I've got Chuck Burgi, famous drummer, drummed with pretty much everybody. I can't even begin to list everybody there. Currently with Billy Joel and some others. How are you, sir?
I am well, man. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, sir. It's a real pleasure. I was thinking before I jumped on, I was thinking, you know, back in the pre-internet days, record album days, I used to get the albums and I'd stare at that at the cover liner notes, and I kept seeing Chuck Burgi, Chuck Burgi, Chuck Burgi. How is this guy drumming for everybody? It was amazing. So now it's amazing to fast forward 40 years to actually be talking to you. It's quite a thrill. So I thank you.
Well, thank you. And just talking about albums, I dearly miss them. That was my way to connect with music and the people that made it. And of course, it was much more mysterious back then. So I miss that mystery. I miss having inserts. I miss actually having the physical album and the liner notes, and if you were lucky, you got maybe some pictures taken in the studio, and then maybe a pose of the band.
Yep.
And I poured over that stuff endlessly while listening to music, and I really miss that visual connection, and also the connection to your imagination. Today, everything is kind of given to you, and back then, if I had any idea that I wanted to copy something a drummer was doing, I had to imagine it. And if I was lucky enough to see them live, then I would be able to go back to listening to that record and maybe that song, and I could close my eyes and remember this is what they were doing, this is what it looked like. So then I would sit on the drums and try and emulate it. So there was a whole kind of sparking of the imagination that I think might be lacking on a certain level with younger musicians, because it's all handed to them. You can go on YouTube and learn how to do anything. So
Sure.
Anyway.
Well, even as a fan, I just miss the feel of the album. Like you said, pouring over the liner notes. I'd pour over for hours just for one album.
Yep.
Let's take it back to when you first started. When did you know that you were good enough on drums to make a career of it?
That's a good question. So I started playing really with earnest after I saw the Beatles on Ed Sullivan. And I know that most people of my generation who are still playing, and a lot who aren't, but who began, that was the impetus. So that was the first inkling I had that somebody could make a living being a musician. Up until that point, my parents were into music, but I never kind of connected the two until I saw the Beatles looking so cool and sounding so amazing. It was soon after that I started a band, a junior high band. Interestingly, around the same time, a gentleman who's, I think he's older than I am, was like my older brother figure. I'm the oldest in my family, but his name was Joe Walsh. And he and his family lived about a mile from my home in Montclair, New Jersey. So he was born in, I believe, Nebraska, but they moved to Montclair, New Jersey, and he was just starting to play guitar when I was in, fourth grade, fifth grade, but I met him. He had a band that were starting, as I was going into junior high, he had a band that were playing high school dances. Back then, they were like, a lot of them were put on by the local churches. And in any case, he befriended my parents or vice versa, and he became like my mentor, in that he introduced me to his drummer, who was about 6 years older, who I'm still really good friends with. And I used Joe's ascendancy to gauge my ability to maybe do the same thing. So when he went away to college, he would come back for the holidays. He would hang out and play with my band. And then when he started a band called the Measles, who evolved into the James Gang, and got his first solo deal, first album deal. He was on tour with Hendrix. He was on tour with all these bands that we were trying to emulate in high school. And he was coming back at least once a year, usually for Christmas, and coming over to my folks' house. And he would show my band how to play songs by Jimi Hendrix, by Led Zeppelin, by The Who, all the different bands that he opened up for with the James Gang. So by the time I was a senior in high school, I had already jammed with Joe a whole lot. And I don't know. And by the time it was close to leaving high school, I had also done a recording with a local band. Band was called Norway, and the album never came out, but it was for Ron Delsner's label. And Ron had a rock show that was taken off. In any case, being able to listen to myself in the studio playing back original playing. We had 9 songs of original music. So that helped fuel me believe that, well, I think I'm listening. I think I'm good enough to keep going this way. My dad cut a deal with me that I had to go to music school, but I rapidly dropped out of Berkeley. And then spent years banging around with cover bands, playing in bands that were doing half and half to cover to pay the bills, and then trying to get their own record deals. So it was really through playing with Joe, having a really good band in high school, that and developing my ear to the point where I was like, I think I can contribute, and I think I might be able to do this like Joe is. And of course, every year that I moved closer to committing to it, his career soared with the James Gang, then Barnstorm, way down the line, eventually joining the Eagles,
Sure.
Where he still is today. But so he was like my barometer for what was possible. And a lot of kids don't have that, don't have somebody either older. And the music business is so weird now that, if I had somebody my age who was interested in being a professional musician, I would have to insist that they learned some other form of survival, another talent, another business ability, because I'm in rarefied air being in Billy's band and have been for a long time. And I've just been blessed to be able to make a living as a journeyman sideman with a whole bunch of different people. A lot of that also was due to the fact that I grew up in Montclair, which was only a half an hour bus ride from Midtown Manhattan. And so that's where a lot of the recordings I was on occurred. And it was just being, not taking no for an answer, even if I felt completely insecure, which I think everybody does.
Sure.
I just had to put it aside and go on cold calls and answer ads in local papers. There was a paper which still may be in existence called The Village Voice, which was printed in Manhattan and made it out to Montclair, was distributed out there. And it had a public notice every week, bands looking for, drummers, looking for keyboard players, vocalists. And I went into the city by bus long before I got my license, just to find out where these auditions were taking place and see what was going on. So I think having that access helped fuel my feelings that, okay, I've got a conduit to where jobs occur, and I'm going to stick with it. But there was plenty of obstacles. So.
Well, now during your career, as I mentioned, you play drums with a lot of different bands, a lot of different genres, from Hall & Oates, Michael Bolton, Blue Oyster Cult, now Billy. Do all those different styles? How challenging was it for you to adapt to the next band or this band because it's such a different style?
It was always challenging. Everybody I've ever worked with has kind of demanded different things from what I know on drums. And what I know is pretty much learned just from listening. I did take private lessons with a great guy who passed a long time ago, and he taught me to read drum music and to really understand that. But I really never had to use that after that. Most of the bands I was in, it was all just being creative and adapting. I think that's definitely something I've been lucky enough to do. And I think it was a trickle down from growing up liking jazz-oriented drummers. I grew up loving Ringo, and probably the older I got, the more I appreciated what he did for music in general and what he did for drumming and what he did to me. But I rapidly went from that to Jimi Hendrix, Mitch Mitchell, whose biggest fan, I mean, he was the biggest fan of Elvin Jones. And he was very jazz oriented. You had Ginger Baker, who was very jazz oriented as well. John Bonham, maybe not so much, but learning what those guys were about, going down that road took me into what was known as jazz rock. So for me, the adaptability came from being interested in and dedicating myself to understanding odd times, groupings, kind of like being a lead drummer. And then once I had what I thought was a fairly decent starting vocabulary from that, then I kind of, went down the different roads that different bands needed or required. I mean, I had never played much double bass until I got into Rainbow. And man, I struggled to catch up with that because I was taking the place of a guy, Bobby Rondinelli, who was a whiz at double bass drum. And I just, whoa. So that was a huge challenge. I think by the time I left the band, I was getting pretty good at that. But, that was really just learning on the job because I got that job and just went with it. And the practicing double bass drums was really live in concert. That's when I'm working on. Or sound check. And so each of the bands I've worked with have required different things. What's really cool at this point in my life of playing with Billy is his music is so broad that his music demands that I use a little reggae, which I was a big fan of ever since The Police came out. And actually even before that with Bob Marley. In any case, a little reggae, a funk, a little hard rock and roll grooves. It's all over the map. And I've been able to draw on a lot of different things that I loved and learned, at least the basics. I knew a lot of guys that never learned reggae. And so as drummers, if they had to play Pressure or Just the Way You Are, they wouldn't know how to swing it. Or they wouldn't be comfortable swinging it. You can copy the beats aren't that particularly hard, but there's a whole concept to turning the drums upside down. So yeah, I'm lucky that every band, including Hall & Oates, I mean, when I joined them, I had to go full circle. I had just come out of the tail end of being in very, very busy progressive bands, and I had to. And they were kind enough to put up with me for the first year I was with them because I played way too much in their band. But I played well, but just a little too much. But it was fun. It was really fun, and it was a learning curve. And I still am learning what not to play. I learned that easier in the studio because you can literally hear it back right there and go like, oh, that's too much or that's whatever. But in joining a band and having it grow organically, it's still so easy for me to play way too much. And I love when I'm at home, I work on nothing but pretty much crazy stuff, but I'll never use it. It's just because I still have a deep interest in it. But no one wants to play with a drummer that's doing that. Nobody my age anyway.
Well, how much freedom do you have? Like, you joined Billy's band after he stopped making new music, essentially.
Right.
So all the songs were well established. Obviously, Liberty was his longtime drummer. How much freedom do you have when you come in to or like to stick to what the original or to add your own?
So in each band, there's a different answer. By the time I got with Billy, I was replacing a guy who had been in his band a long time and who had been on all the hits. And I just decided that, initially I was going to pretty much copy all the parts. I was going to emulate all the parts. I can't really copy them, but as opposed to other bands, like for instance, I am joining, let's say Meatloaf, who I was fortunate enough to work with for 6.5 years. When I joined him, the songs that we did in the sets were from albums, but some of the albums were so long ago, like the original Bat Out of Hell, that was from the late 70s. So when I joined him in the mid 80s, he gave me great latitude to play those songs the way I thought I could and should. Whereas when I joined Billy, I felt, oh my God, I have to create an homage to Liberty, because for the most part, nothing was broken on those hits, especially on the hits. But for most of those songs, it was a great, heartfelt, sometimes incredibly well thought out performance. And I certainly made the mistake when I first joined them live of throwing a lot of me in. And I learned that was a mistake, especially in Billy's situation. His music needed that emulation, I thought, of the originals. And so that's it. Every one of the bands has required different stuff. With Billy, it really needs to sit. In fact, one of the things he had asked me, what do you want to do coming into this band? And by then I had realized, I want to play all your songs album tempo. And I had already been in the Broadway show Movin' Out, where almost every song was twice as fast. So I was really going out on a limb because I knew I was going to struggle with the original tempo thing, because we played a lot of those songs that were hits. Every night, I must have done 1,500 performances of most of his hits at another 15 BPM. So when I first joined Billy, I was like, oh my God, every muscle in my being was wanting to play twice as fast, but I couldn't. But it really worked out because by the end of that first year, I felt like, okay, I'm getting a handle on what this job needs. And it was overwhelming, becoming drums in, let's say, even Rainbow or there were drummers before me, but nobody was ever there as long as Liberty was in Billy's situation, and nobody had played on as many hits, right? Even in Bat Out of Hell, there were two drummers. It was Max Weinberg and Willie Wilcox, and they never went on the road with me. They were just studio guys at that point. They had their own bands. So taking Lib's spot was a very special and unique situation.
Now you mentioned, playing the musical, and I love the musical. I saw it, I don't know how many times, 5, 6 times in Chicago.
Wow.
Is playing, aside from the fact that the tempo was different, is playing the drums in that venue different? Do you play the drums differently in that venue than you do like in an outdoor stadium?
No, but I played for and at the dancers, right? Because certainly playing in the theater, it feels different than playing in a stadium, but what I put my intention on was the dancers, because we were propelling their performances, because there was no dialogue, right?
Right.
So we had a really great guy who was singing the Billy stuff, but the dancers were pretty much bringing it to life for the audience. So the consistency of that was totally different than playing a show in a way, because we play Billy's stuff slightly different, now that we've gotten used to each other. it's not the same as playing for a dance troupe, which I thought it needed the same rhythmic and tempo consistency every night. And that was my focus. Whereas if I'm doing a concert, maybe it's just to send my energy out and support the singer-songwriter, in Billy's case, or to propel the band as a whole out to the audience out there. But when you're playing with the dancers, to me, my focus was down there, and I let them be the ones to take the music and put it out to the crowd. So it was really different for me. So if that makes any sense.
No, absolutely. I just was curious how you explained it properly. Billy's been producing songs since the early 70s, at least in this form. And you've jumped on fairly recently in his career.
Yeah.
The equipment has changed a lot since then. So when you're drumming now, you've got a lot different equipment. Like, how does that translate to, Liberty's equipment from 1974?
That's a good question. So when I joined Billy, I had a really big kit, and it was the same size kit I've used with almost everyone. And over time, I've whittled it down. So I try and emulate what Liberty did on a bigger kit, because for years he had like at least 3 toms and at least a floor, so 4 toms. I had 3 toms on top, 2 on the floor when I joined Billy, and a big gong drum. In any case, it's gone completely opposite. I've narrowed what I bring to Billy's band down for a variety of reasons. One, it's made life much easier for our sound man. 2, I think it's more contemporary, taking the success of bands like Foo Fighters, and anything that Dave Grohl's done, who I think is one of the premier, drummers of the last 20 years. He's pretty much played a pretty simple kit. And that, in conjunction with me putting together the room I'm in now, which is a home studio, I realized, all these toms, they're kind of getting in my way, and they're making life much harder to record and to edit and to look and to do. So in the course of putting my studio together, I actually slowly narrowed the kit down. Now, I'm using the same drum set or the same drum make that Liberty had for years, which is Tama. So I don't know. I've always used a metal snare, and I still do with Billy. And it's probably one of the only real differences. And at the same time, the way we're mixed and the way our sound man, who has been with Billy for 30 years, the way he mixes us, it really doesn't, I don't really hear that much of a difference. I know he's trying to get the best sound out of my kit. I'm trying to give him a simple, big sound that works in arenas. And I have now found that less is more. And it's for a variety of reasons, but sonically in the really big places, I mean, I have 1 tom, I have 1 floor, and I have 1 big effect drum, which kind of is like my second floor. But it's made my life a whole lot easier, and it's made sound man a whole lot easier, and I think it's made the band sound cleaner and bigger. So that's really the only difference. That like I said, I'm still using Tama drums. I don't use zills and cymbals, but all that's ancillary to trying to emulate the original songs, which at this point, I've been in Billy's now 17 years, which is really a drop in the bucket for his longevity, but it's almost, I believe it's longer than Liberty was actually in the band. In any case, we have been allowed to develop his music so that it resonates with who each of us is. And so I'm able to bring, I've always been a hard rock fan, and I've always been an aggressive drumming fan, which Liberty always was. But I don't know, we're doing much the same thing. The equipment's very much the same. So in effect, a long answer to that question is there hasn't been a whole lot of difference, I don't think, from what Liberty was doing with Billy and what I'm trying to do, other than for him, he was the guy that developed all those parts. And I have to keep in mind that all those parts they don't need any real changing. I'm allowed a little latitude but I try and emulate all the stuff that he's done on every one of the hits so that people who are used to hearing those songs don't go, whoa, what's that? No, I mean, really, Billy's singing them like better than the record at times. And I just want to put those songs across. It's really playing for the song and playing for the artist. So I'm there to support Bill and to drive the bus that is 8 people on stage. So it's kind of doing the same stuff that Libba was a long time ago.
Well, before I let you go, I have one last question for you, sir.
Sure.
I was in Madison Square Garden this past, I believe it was October. That was a bucket list for me to see, Billy Joel live in Madison Square Garden. It was amazing. As we talked earlier, I've seen you guys in Wrigley Field, which was just an amazing experience because of the venue. Yeah. What would be? Do you have any venues that you particularly love, and do you have any venue that, whether from Billy or previous or other music, do you have any venue that you particularly love, and any venue that you haven't played that you really want to play?
Oh, that's a good question. So I really got to say my favorite venue is Madison Square Garden. The way it looks when you're up on stage, the way it sounds so good on stage.
Yeah.
And really all the other, there are venues all over the world that I've been fortunate enough to play, but as far as arenas go, the Garden is one. And I think my favorite outdoor thing has been, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say Fenway Park in Boston. It is a big, small stadium, and it's so it just feels wonderful to play there. And I don't know, it's not as big as other baseball stadiums. We've only started playing, for the most part, football stadiums with Billy now, and they're so huge that they're all kind of the same. Some of them are more daunting to look out and see all those people. Some of them have the crowds closer to you. Some of them, they're all configured sort of the same. But I would say MSG is by far and away my favorite venue to play in. And there's also another smaller place. There were 2. One doesn't exist anymore in Manhattan, and it was called the Ritz Theater. And then the other one is the Beacon Theater, which I was lucky enough to play at least once or twice. And it's an amazing sounding room as well. So, but it's a theater, so it sounds completely different than MSG, and has a really great acoustic feel to it. At this point, I play with in-ears, so it's judging these places is a little more on how they feel than what I'm actually hearing, because my mix is very controlled and doesn't really reflect the acoustics of the room we're playing in.
Well, Chuck, I really, really appreciate your time. I encourage everyone to check out your website, chuckburgi.com.
Oh my God, it's so out of date.
But it's an amazing site still. It's got everything on there.
Thanks.
Well, I really, seriously, I really appreciate this. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your consideration in answering all my questions. I'm wearing the Billy River Tree tie.
I see, and that's awesome. It's like, wait a minute, I could only see the top half, and I'm like, that looks suspiciously. It is.
There it is. I've been a fan of Billy since the early 70s. I've been a fan of yours from seeing your name on there and hearing you. This has been a thrill for me, and I really appreciate your time.
Oh, dude, thank you so much. Well, do you play drums?
No, I have no musical abilities whatsoever. But I'm a big fan. I the drums actually are my favorite, probably because my cousin was a local drummer, local bands. He also went to Berkeley.
Wow.
So I kind of I kind of always focused on the drummer, which is probably why I focused on you originally.
Thank you, man. Thanks.
But again, I really appreciate your time. This has been a
Hey.
thrill for me.
My pleasure, and thank you for reaching out. You ever want to do part 2? Just you know where to hit me. And if you hear of us coming into your neighborhood, hit me as well.
Oh, I absolutely will, sir. And if there's anything I can do for you, you just let me know.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. You have a great day.
Have a great day.
Take
Bye-bye
care.
now.
Bye-bye.